Where do original ideas actually come from? It's a question that kind of haunts almost everyone trying to make something new today. We constantly feel this immense modern pressure to create something entirely out of thin air. Whether you're an artist, an entrepreneur, or a writer, there's this heavy expectation that true brilliance means inventing something that has absolutely no precedent. But where did we actually get this idea? Have we really always thought about creativity this way? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at the romantic genius and the illusion of ex nihilo. We're going to unpack how the philosophical shifts of the 18th and 19th centuries literally invented the myth of the solitary genius. We'll see how this concept changed not just how we view art, but how it legally defined property itself. All right, here's our roadmap for today. First, the illusion of ex nihilo. Second, Edward Young's original genius. Third, the mysticism of the mind. Fourth, the paradox of inspiration. And finally, how genius changed law. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The illusion of ex nihilo. To really grasp where we are today, we gotta completely reevaluate how human beings used to think about the creative process. Take the word inventio. Etymologically, it comes from the Latin invenio, which simply means to find. Before the 18th century, if you were considered a great creator, your invention was actually your ability to recover and gracefully rearrange older pre-existing material. You weren't pulling ideas out of the ether, right? You were a master remixer of tradition. You found things and you made them better. But then our culture did a complete 180-degree turn. Over time, the concept of artistic creation shifted to mean exactly the opposite of finding. It meant ex nihilo, or creating out of nothing. It became this idea of an unbidden force, native strictly to an individual, and suddenly we burdened creators with this heavy expectation that to be valid, they must be entirely 100% original, completely divorced from past influence. This was a massive paradigm shift. It's wonderfully captured by the literary critic M.H. Abrams. Think of it like this. On one side, we have the classical view of imitation, the metaphor of the mirror. Art was supposed to reflect nature, and creating it was almost like a mechanical manufacture. But on the other side, we have the new romantic view of originality, the lamp. The author isn't reflecting the outside world anymore. They are the lamp, emitting light right from their own internal soul. It's an organic growth from within. Moving on to Section 2, Edward Young's original genius. So who flipped the script here? Who turned off the mirror and turned on the lamp? Well, it started with Edward Young's manifesto, Conjectures on Original Composition, published back in 1759. In it, he writes this bold statement: genius is knowledge innate. This essay was an absolute catalyst for the culture. Young advocated that authors should actually cut themselves off from tradition and learning entirely. Why? So their minds could become these unobstructed conduits for the raw originality residing deep inside them. He framed authorship as an autonomous, almost mystical enterprise of the individual. The crucial point is captured perfectly in this quote from Young. An original may be said to be of a vegetable nature. It rises spontaneously from the vital root of genius. It grows. It is not made. I mean, look at that organic metaphor. Creation was suddenly no longer viewed as the mechanical labor of arranging words or mixing paint. It was spontaneous, natural growth. The idea was that an imitator builds a machine out of borrowed parts, but a true genius grows a flower from their own roots. Which brings us to Section 3, the mysticism of the mind. Once Edward Young planted that seed, the philosophers and poets of the ensuing Romantic era elevated it to a nearly divine status. William Wordsworth really supercharged it. He famously declared, "Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings." Notice what's happening here. The external, objective world is completely vanishing from the equation. The author's internal emotional state has become the sole source of artistic truth. You aren't studying the world to write anymore. You're just overflowing with your own feelings. And the romantic ego just kept escalating from there. Percy Bysshe Shelley took it to its absolute peak, stating that poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. Shelley literally placed the poet's inspiration above science, above reason, and above objective philosophy. During this era of increasing secularization, art basically became a kind of substitute religion, and the creative genius was viewed as its untouchable prophet. Let's look at Section 4, the paradox of inspiration. Because if you look closely at this shiny new model of authorship, there is a massive inherent contradiction lurking right at the center of it. Scholars call it the romantic paradox. Authors were suddenly exalted for their unique individual selves. They were treated almost like superhumans.
Yet at the exact same time, their much-celebrated originality was said to spring from an unconscious force that they themselves couldn't actively access or understand. It's an amazing irony. The genius has no real conscious control over the divine inspiration they're being worshipped for. They're essentially just passive vessels for a mysterious internal wind.
We can actually map how fast this idea infected society. In 1759, Young publishes his Conjectures. By 1793, the philosopher Immanuel Kant publishes his Critique of Judgment, formalizing the idea that genius is an innate mental aptitude through which nature gives the rule to art. And by the 19th century, this rapid shift from literary theory to philosophical engine crashes into the real world, causing a massive decline in strict copyright formalities across Europe.
And that leads us perfectly into Section 5, How Genius Changed Law.
We're shifting focus now to the tangible legal impact, because ideas don't just stay in poetry books. They fundamentally shape our economy and our laws. So how did this mysticism change the real world? How does an abstract feeling about a spontaneous overflow or a vegetable nature directly connect to the economics of publishing and the legal rights of citizens?
Well, it completely changed how we view intellectual property. In the 18th century, copyright was largely viewed as a privilege. It was granted by the state, usually to publishers, and it required strict bureaucratic formalities like registration and legal deposit to exist at all. But thanks to Romantic philosophy, specifically thinkers like Fichte, who argued the unique form of an expression is the author's inalienable property, the 19th century began to view copyright as a natural right. This right was born instantly from the author's very act of creation. Suddenly, state formalities weren't seen as necessary rules. They were deemed an unjust burden on the natural genius.
This led to the literal death of bureaucratic copyright formalities across much of continental Europe. Because authors' rights were now recognized as emerging instantly from the act of creation, bureaucratic rules lost their power to dictate who owned what. France softened its legal deposits, turning them from strict conditions for ownership into mere declarations needed only if you were filing a lawsuit. Germany went even further, abolishing statutory formalities entirely because they placed their legal trust in the person of the creator. You simply cannot force a natural divine right to be registered on a piece of government paper before it exists. The magical act of creation was considered enough. Which brings us to a vital question to end on today. Is the modern lone genius creating utterly original work out of nothing, just a legal and cultural fiction we inherited from the 18th century? I mean, we've built our laws and our artistic expectations around this idea of creation ex nihilo. But next time you feel the immense pressure to be perfectly, magically original without any outside influence, remember that even that expectation was, well, invented. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the ideas we take for granted.